Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're looking at what is, well, essentially a survival guide, but not the kind where you learn to, start a fire with two sticks or fight off a bear. This is about institutional survival.
Which is, I would argue, often much harder.
Yeah. We're unpacking a narrative called The Art of Subtle Resistance, specifically a chapter focusing on how resistance learned to survive. And honestly, reading through this, I kept waiting for the Braveheart moment.
The charge, the big speech.
Exactly. The blue face paint, the whole thing.
Mm.
And I found the opposite. I found a manual on how to disappear.
Mm-hmm.
It poses this central paradox that I really want to grill you on today. How does a movement survive when it stops fighting and starts hiding? Because to me, that sounds an awful lot like losing.
It looks like losing, certainly. If you're watching from a distance, it absolutely looks like the lights have gone out.
Right.
But the argument here is that the lights didn't go out. They just went indoors. We're looking at a specific historical shift in the printing industry when regulation came down hard, really hard, to stop the flow of unauthorized information.
And the industry didn't explode in a revolution.
No, it imploded. It compressed.
Okay. And that's our mission today. We need to figure out if this compression was actually a brilliant strategic move or just a slow death. Because the source argues that by moving from open confrontation to subtle survival, the printing press didn't just stay alive. It actually made the words more powerful.
It changed the physics of the message. I mean, when you shout, people hear noise. When you whisper, people lean in.
Okay, but let's look at the mechanics of this first. Because you can't just decide to be subtle with a printing press.
No.
We're talking about the era of iron and lead. These aren't laptops you can just close when the teacher walks by.
That's the logistical nightmare, right? The narrative describes a physical transformation that is really quite brutal. Before the crackdown, a printing workshop is a factory. It's loud, it smells like ink, it takes up a massive amount of space. You want scale.
You want to dominate the market.
Exactly. But the moment the regulation drops, the moment the authorities say this is illegal, scale becomes a death sentence. Being big makes you an easy target.
You can't hide a factory.
You can't. So the source details the shift where workshops didn't just close, they sort of dissolved into smaller units.
But how does that work practically? I mean, you can't put a press in a backpack.
No, but you can strip it down. You move from the high-ceilinged workshop on the main street to a cellar with a dirt floor. You dismantle the heavy framing, and the most interesting part mentioned is the type, the lead letters. That's the heaviest, most incriminating evidence you possess.
So if you get caught with a barrel of lead type, you're done.
You're absolutely done. So you hide it, you distribute it. Instead of one central warehouse, you have a network of safe houses. One guy holds the paper.
Okay. Another guy holds the ink, a third guy has the press mechanism. They only come together for the act of printing, and then they scatter again.
It's like a heist crew.
It is! It's decentralized manufacturing before that was even a concept. But here's the friction point. Doing this destroys your efficiency. You can't print 5,000 copies a day anymore.
That's what I'm stuck on. The narrative frames this as resilience, calling it an evolutionary step. It says, the organism shrinks its footprint to survive the winter. Which sounds poetic, but if your output drops by 90%, aren't you effectively silenced? If I'm a dictator and I force you into a cellar where you can only print 10 pamphlets a week, I've won.
Have you?
I think that depends on what you believe the goal of printing is. If the goal is volume commercial success, then yes, the dictator won.
Okay.
But if the goal is the transmission of a dangerous idea, volume matters a lot less than continuity.
Quality over quantity, or survival over extinction. The source argues that print runs became quieter. That's a fascinating phrase. It means they stopped trying to flood the streets. They started targeting specific hands.
Wow.
If you print 10,000 broadsheets and the police burn 9,000 of them, you've wasted massive resources and exposed your entire network.
Right.
But if you print 50 copies and every single one of them goes to a key influencer, a community leader, or another writer, you haven't been silenced. You've just become a sniper instead of a machine gunner.
So it's about efficiency of impact rather than efficiency of production.
Precisely. And that forced adaptation, that lesson that rigidity leads to breaking, is crucial. The printers who insisted on staying big, who insisted on their rights to operate openly,
They were crushed.
they were crushed, their equipment was seized. The ones who survived were the ones willing to look like they had vanished.
Which segues perfectly into the actual content. Because if you're only printing 50 copies and you're risking prison to do it, you are not going to print a recipe for boiled cabbage.
You are certainly not.
The narrative says words were chosen with care. And again, that sounds nice, but I want to dig into the how. Does this just mean they use shorter sentences to save paper?
It means they use density. When you operate in the open, you can afford to be sloppy, you can ramble, you can be explicit because you aren't afraid of the consequences. But when you're underground, ambiguity becomes a weapon.
Coded language.
Coded language, allegory, metaphor. The text mentions that printers learned to pause. That's a behavioral change. Instead of reacting to a government decree the next morning with a furious rebuttal, they would wait. They'd encode the criticism into a story about, say, Roman history.
So you write a history book about a tyrant Nero falling from power, but everyone reading it knows you're actually talking about the current king.
Exactly. It's plausible deniability. If the censor comes knocking, you say, I'm just a historian, I love the classics. But the audience knows.
Yeah.
And this forces the authorities into a double bind.
Yeah.
Do they arrest you for writing about history? If they do, they look paranoid and weak.
It makes the regime look terrified of shadows.
And that empowers the resistance. But there's a flip side to this careful choice of words. It requires a much higher level of skill. You can't just be angry, you have to be clever. The narrative points out that meaning moves through whispers, not announcements.
I highlighted that line. It creates a kind of scarcity value, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, think about the modern internet. We are drowning in announcements, hot takes, viral threads, breaking news. It's a fire hose. And because there's so much of it, we value each individual piece of information at close to zero.
It's cheap. Talk is cheap.
But in this underground economy, talk is expensive. If I have to meet you in a back alley or use a password or decipher a dense allegorical text to understand the truth, that feud becomes sacred to me. I've worked for it.
It creates a bond. The source says readers learned to listen, which implies the audience wasn't just sitting there eating popcorn. They had to work too.
That's the collaboration aspect. In a free market, the reader is a consumer. Entertain me. In a restricted market, the reader is a conspirator. Protect me.
Right.
By accepting that pamphlet, the reader is taking a risk. That creates a psychological buy-in that you just don't get with legal media.
You're part of the club.
You're part of the resistance, even if all you did was read a page. And that is why the quiet approach works. It builds a hardcore, loyal base rather than a wide, shallow one.
But let's play devil's advocate again. There's a section here that talks about redefining surrender. It says, this was not surrender, it was adjustment. That sounds like the kind of thing a loser tells themselves to sleep at night. I didn't lose, I just adjusted.
It does sound like rationalization, doesn't it?
It really does. We didn't get kicked out of the Capitol. We just decided the countryside has better air.
Right. But look at the spatial metaphor the narrative uses to back this up. It says, printing no longer stood in front of authority. It moved beside it. This is critical.
Okay.
Standing in front is a blockade. It's physics. Two objects cannot occupy the same space. If the state is a tank and you stand in front of it, you are flat.
So moving beside it.
Moving beside implies parallel existence. You aren't stopping the tank. You're letting the tank roll by, and you're operating in the ditch next to the road.
But isn't the point of resistance to stop the tank?
Eventually. But you can't stop the tank if you're dead. This brings us to the lesson of persistence. The narrative argues that flashpoints, riots, open battles, they burn out, they run out of energy or people or will, but operating beside authority allows you to outlast it.
It's the old idea of the river and the stone. The stone is heavy and rigid, but the water just goes around it.
And eventually the water wears the stone down to sand. But it takes time. This method requires a level of patience that is, well, it's agonizing. The text mentions patiently waiting for moments when attention drifted.
The eye of Sauron can't look everywhere at once.
It really can't. Bureaucracies are slow, they are rigid, they are designed to fight other armies, not ghosts. When the resistance became subtle, it moved out of the spectrum that the authority was even designed to detect.
So the adjustment isn't admitting defeat. It's changing the game to one the authority doesn't know how to play.
Exactly. The authority wants a fight. It has soldiers. It has prisons. It is begging you to throw a brick so it can shoot you.
And by refusing to throw the brick.
By simply printing quietly and hiding the press, you deny them the engagement they need to destroy you.
That's actually incredibly frustrating for the person in power.
It's maddening. You know something is happening. You know ideas are spreading. But you can't find the source. You can't stamp it out because there's no headquarters to burn down.
It reminds me of that line about creativity. Control creates limits, but also creativity. We usually think censorship makes art worse. But you're suggesting, and the source is suggesting, that it might actually make the thinking sharper.
It forces lateral thinking.
Yeah.
If I can't say the king is a thief, I have to write a play about the nature of property and theft that makes the audience realize the king is a thief on their own.
Ah.
That is actually a more powerful intellectual journey for the audience. They have the realization themselves.
And that sticks harder than just being told something.
Much harder. The constraints force the resistance to become smarter. In a weird irony, the regulation actually improves the quality of the opponent.
So we've got this picture of a resistance that is smaller, quieter, slower, but denser and more intelligent. But I want to go back to the unseen part. The narrative closes with this idea that change continues even when unseen.
This is the hardest pill to swallow for modern activists, I think. We live in the economy of visibility. If it's not on the timeline, it didn't happen.
So it didn't happen.
Yeah, but in this context, invisibility is the shield. The source implies that the most dangerous phase for the authority wasn't the riots, it was the silence. Because in that silence, the roots were growing underground.
The tectonic plates were shifting.
Right. Just because you don't feel the earthquake yet doesn't mean the pressure isn't building. The printing press, by going dark, stopped being a political target and started becoming a cultural constant. It started shaping belief in private spaces, homes, cellars, quiet conversations.
And those private beliefs are what eventually topple the regime.
Yes. You change the mind, and the politics follows. But you have to survive long enough to change the mind.
So to synthesize this whole journey, we started with a crackdown that should have ended the industry. But instead of dying, printing stripped off its heavy armor, broke into pieces, and went underground. It traded volume for potency. It traded speed for stealth.
And it traded the satisfaction of a heroic stand for the utility of long-term survival.
Is it a rebranding of cowardice into strategy?
I wouldn't call it cowardice. I'd call it the discipline of remaining. The authority said leave. The resistance said, no, we'll just stand over here where you can't see us.
And that remaining is the ultimate defiance.
It is. If their goal is to erase you, simply existing is an act of war.
The source ends with a tease for the next chapter, it says. In the next phase, printing will begin shaping belief and personal interpretation, quietly altering how people understood truth.
Which is the payoff. All this hiding, all this dismantled machinery, it was all for that. To get to the point where they could rewrite the software of society.
Right.
But they couldn't do that if they had all been hanged in the first week.
A fair point. You have to live to tell the tale.
You have to live to print the tale.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to throw this back to you, the listener. Because while this is a history deep dive, the logic is unnervingly relevant. We are obsessed with the loud signal. We look at the protests, the tweets, the announcements.
But if we follow the logic we just unpacked, that the most durable changes happen in the dark, through whispers, it forces a question.
What are we missing?
Exactly. What is happening beside us right now? What are the quiet adjustments, the subtle networks, the coded conversations that are building the next reality while we're all distracted by the fireworks of the current one?
Are we staring at the boulder while the river is cutting a new canyon right behind our backs?
That is the question. And usually by the time you hear the water, it's already too late to stop it.
Something to think about while you're scrolling through the noise today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the art of subtle resistance. We'll see you in the margins next time.